Okay. This morning we're going to interview Aaron Liepe. Aaron was a P-40 pilot, among other planes, but primarily, I believe, P-40s in China. So we want to talk about that this morning. I think, first of all, Aaron, if you would, I'll let you kind of describe the P-40 to us and give us some information about that, if you could.
Well, okay, this is a belly tank, which is, if my memory serves me, around 65 or 75 auxiliary gallons. And we did have capabilities of carrying some smaller bombs on the wings, but occasionally we would dispense this and carry a 500-pound bombs there. And then in the wings, each of the wings, we had the 350 caliber machine guns. And it just was a great bird. It was a strong, physically strong vehicle. And
it seems like it was similar to the Navy Wildcat as far as sturdiness and the same type of how you would fight against the Japanese Zero or the tactics that you would use. Is that correct or not?
Well, you know, I really have to go back a little bit. You know, General Chenault was retired from the Air Force in, I think, 1936 or thereabouts. I'm not dated, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons that he was retired was because of his he fell out of favor with the folks up in Washington, because he was preaching the hit and run concentrated fire attack. Put a couple airplanes together, let them go in, make their attack, get out, a hit and run type of thing. And the consensus of the opinion at that time was that we should get in the old-fashioned dogfight like they did back in World War I. But the thing that General Chenault is best known for, of course, is because of his Flying Tigers, American Volunteer Group, and later on us. But the thing he should be recognized for, and has never gotten the recognition that he should have gotten, was the fact that every single Air Force unit, our Navy, Marines, our Air Force, all of our allies used the tactics for which he was virtually cashiered out of the service.
For which Flatley and Thatch get credit for in the Navy?
Well,
somewhat.
Somewhat, yeah. But basically they use the same thing. Get up, get altitude, get speed, altitude, hit, run, come back for a second time. Don't just stay in there. And I think that was, but the airplane was so good at that because it was rugged. You could put this thing in a dive and you could get up way up there, and it just shuddered and everything else, but it just held together. And it just was, and it would take a lot of punishment. We had fellows come back with some of the wings virtually cut off.
Oh, really? Tell me about the engine and I understand that the cooling system would heat up fairly rapidly if you were getting ready to take off.
Right. It's an inline engine. It was one of the first inline engines of the so-called modern era, and it started out with a engine that again, I'm trying to remember facts, but it was only about 11 horsepower or something like that. And gradually through the years it was advanced and built up to where I think the last ones were up around 1700 horsepower. But the one weakness of the airplane was the fact that it was liquid cooled, and the oil coolers and the coolers were in this area of the airplane here. And as a result of that, we were very vulnerable. One of the things we hated to do was ground strafing, because of the vulnerability of picking up small arms fire in this part of the airplane, which would knock us out. And because of that type, you basically had to get it in the air in a short period of time, and especially in the hot air regions because of the heat of inline engine.
I understand that's one reason the P-51 moved that scoop back to the middle.
Yeah, but you know, there's some controversy about that. Yeah, I think every airplane developed its own personality, and it had its strong features and it had its weak features. And again, this was what General Chennault taught us. You know, you use your strong features and you overcome your weak features. You know, one of the weak features of the P-51 was the fact that they did move this back here. Our experience was that when we picked up ground fire, most of the time we'd pick it up behind the wing, either the trailing edge of the wings or in the back part of the fuselage, primarily because the small arms people on the ground weren't educated or trained in the so-called deflection shooting. So they would aim at the airplane, at the front part of the airplane, but by the time the bullet got there, the airplane had moved.
They didn't lead.
Yeah, and that made the P-51 from a ground support aircraft a much weaker in a sense, vulnerable. I guess vulnerable would be the better word, even than this, because that's the area where you would be picking up the hits. It wasn't as much of a factor with the P-40 as it was with the P-51. However, you still had that vulnerability because one shot into those cooling systems and you were. But I have to tell you, we had one of our fellows, a fellow by the name of Jack Best, who on a strafing mission had his engine shot out, and he flew that. One of our guys covered him. He throttled back, and he flew that for almost an hour and 15 minutes, with everything redline. He finally landed it, and when he stopped the airplane, the engine was just one solid block of metal. It was so hot it just fused all of it. While it was going, it kept going. Yeah. We're getting off the subject.
Oh, that's fine. Okay, let's go back to before the beginning, really. Tell me, when and where were you born?
I was born in Dubuque, Iowa, in September of 1919.
September the what?
16.
And Dubuque, is that on a river?
It's on the Mississippi River.
Mississippi,
right
so.
Where Illinois, Wisconsin, and Iowa join.
Yeah. What did your dad do?
My father was a tailor from the old world.
Uh-huh. Was he born in the old world?
Oh yes.
Where is that?
He was born in Kiev, Russia,
Oh.
in the Ukraine.
Uh-huh. How is it that he came to the United States?
Oh, well, as a young man, at the age of 13, he, I guess you'd call it, escaped from Russia because of their recruiting for the military, and he just got out ahead of time. And as a youngster of 13, 14 years of age,
Which would have been what year?
well, let's see, he was born in 84, which would have made it 97, 1897, 1898.
Around the turn of the century.
Yeah. And he made his way to Holland. Where
Was that big? Were they getting ready for the Sino when they were fighting the Japanese? Were they gearing up for Russia?
Yeah, I really don't know about that.
He just didn't want to go into the military.
Well, they used to come down. They'd drive down the streets and they'd say you, and you, and I mean, and so he tried. A year earlier, he tried to get out, and he got halfway across Germany, and he got stopped and got sent back to. And then the next year, he tried it again, and that time he got all the way over to Holland, where there was some distant relatives, family relatives, and he stayed there. He joined up with them and got a job there, and then he met my mother, and they were married in 1907. And
she was Dutch then?
She was Dutch, Holland. Her family was was well situated in Rotterdam, Holland at the time, and
What did they do?
they were in the clothing business.
Is that how he got into it?
Yes, yeah, right. He joined up with them, and that's where he got. And then when they were married, they decided to come to the United States on their honeymoon, and they were going to see if they liked it here, and if they were going to stay, and if not, they were going to go back. Fortunately, they liked it. They settled into New York City, and in the tailoring trade, there was kind of a caste system there, where a tailor at the beginning level was kind of as a pant maker. I mean, and then you became a vest maker, and the kind of the top of the grade was the coat maker because of the intricacies of a coat. Well, my father was trained to be a coat maker, so he had no problem most everywhere he went getting work, and he had no problem when he first came to this country. But in 1910, I think, there was quite a depression, and my father was out of work in New York. The needle trades were very, very hard hit, and there was a distant, not distant, I guess it was actually an aunt and uncle who lived in Dubuque, Iowa. And how they got there, why they got there, I'd love to know, but I never did find out. And so my father went out to Dubuque to see if he could find work there, and he did. And then my mother moved there, and the rest is kind of history.
How do you spell Dubuque?
D-U-B-U-Q-U-E.
3 U's.
Yeah.
Is that an Indian name, probably?
French.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. French name, I think.
Okay, you were born in 1990. Now, you grew up during the Depression, or the later Depression. What was that like for you?
Well,
and your family?
We happen to be one of the fortunate families in that my father always had a job. He always had a paycheck. And although at times it was very small, at least we had that. So we had a roof over our head. We had clothes on our back. We had food on the table, which a lot of my friends and contemporaries didn't have. So in that sense, we were reasonably comfortable. But the one thing that we didn't have, and like all the rest, we didn't have spending money. I mean, you couldn't buy your entertainment. You had to create it. So as a result of that, my peers, we had a big peer group, a lot of friends, and we just did things and made it work, And then in the middle of the 30s, I got into music when I was in junior high school. And in the middle 30s, a buddy of mine and I formed a little dance band. I was, I think, 16 years of age, and he was 15 years of age. But we were good. We were really good.
What did you play?
I played the reed instruments, and he played the woodwind. I mean, the trumpet.
And the reed instruments are?
Saxophone, clarinet, oboe, and that sort of thing.
Like Glenn Miller type of music, or was he alone?
Yeah.
Was he there?
Well, he didn't come along until about 1937, but yeah, it was in that era. And we were fortunate, and we got there was a fellow that played with, was an arranger for an orchestra in Chicago, and he got in trouble with the union, and so they suspended him from Chicago for a year. And there was another little professional orchestra in our town. They were older than we were, and so forth. And the grandfather of this young man who had this band had been in show business and music and so forth. So he hired this gentleman to come and help train his band and do arrangements for him. So we got him to do arrangements for us, and so we had, for very youngsters, we had some very, very good music. As a matter of fact, he wrote, we had the first arrangement for Deep Purple. Deep Purple. It was a semi-classical, and we were doing that at our high school band. I forgot the name of it in the classical type. And
that was one of the Dorseys, I think.
yeah, right. And we were playing at one time, and I said to this fellow, I said, couldn't you do something with this? And he says, yeah. And he made an arrangement. And we sold that arrangement. We sold that arrangement for $200 to one of the bands in Chicago, whatever it was. And $200 was just a fortune to us, you know. And then Deep Purple took off after that.
So it wasn't really all that popular when you first started playing it?
No, I mean, I think we had the first dance arrangement for what became known as Deep Purple, which was not the original name.
Oh, really?
No.
What was it? Do you remember?
I don't know. I have to look it up. It's a kind of a semi-classical.
Yeah.
Number.
That's great.
And that was one of the ways that I made my spending money and provided funds for me to go to college later on.
Now, did you have brothers and sisters?
I have 2 sisters.
Now they,
One of them has passed on, and the other they're both older than me.
You're talking about how you made your own entertainment. Did you use the river a lot for stuff that you did?
No, not really. We did more outdoors we did a lot of hiking in the wintertime. We did a lot of skiing and skating. In the summertime, we were out in the picnicking and.
This cross-country skiing you're talking about?
No.
Was it downhill?
Just downhill, yeah. Well, Dubuque is a fairly hilly area. In fact, they do have a couple ski runs there now. But we would just go out in the country, and a couple golf courses around there that were open, and they just made good places for us to ski. But we'd get the gals, and we'd go out and go skiing and take a little knapsack along with some hot dogs and some marshmallows and some hot chocolate and spend the day, you know. And in the summertime, we had a spot that was maybe about a mile. We lived right near the outskirts of the city, and maybe about a mile out in the country area.
How large was Dubuque then?
Well, at that time, when I left there, it had grown from about 37, 38 to about 40, 42,000. And of course, it's bigger than that now. But there was a place where we used to go, and we'd go swimming. And in the wintertime, we'd clean the area off, and we'd go ice skating. So it was fun.
Did you play sports in school?
Yeah, I played football.
What position?
I was center. Yeah. Not all that great.
The equipment that you had those days was a little different than what you
Yeah, a
have
little
now.
different. Yeah, leather helmet with a little padding on the inside.
Right.
Yeah.
So, what year did you graduate from high school then?
1937.
Okay, and so did you start college right away?
I started college right away.
Where did you go?
At first, I went to a little school that, in fact, I was practically raised on their campus, with the University of Dubuque. My best buddy's dad was the athletic director there.
Oh.
And then I went to the University of Alabama.
Oh.
I got a scholarship down there. And in those days, you went.
Where's that? Tuscaloosa?
Tuscaloosa.
Yeah.
Why do you know that?
Oh, I just follow football and stuff. No, I know that. Bear Bryant.
Well,
that was before.
Yeah, it was before
him.
That was before Bear Bryant.
Wallace Wade.
No. Jake. Oh, terrible. It'll come to me right after I leave here.
Rammer, Jammer, Yaller, Hammer.
Yeah.
Give 'em Hail, Alabama.
Yeah.
They have that.
No,
that came later too.
that came later. Yeah.
Okay, one of my friends went to Alabama.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, he says that. Yeah. So, what was your major there?
I was in the business school.
How is it that you end up going to Alabama?
I got a small scholarship through advertising agency, and you know, like I say, you went where you could afford to go, and that scholarship made I was able to go.
When you were growing up, did you go to church a lot? Did your family do stuff like that?
No, we were. I'm Jewish, and we had a very small community there, and so we didn't have an active religious life, so to speak.
At Alabama, did you have any problems with anti-Semitism down there?
Oh, you know, when I went to school, college, there was an implied anti-Semitism in that if you were Jewish, you weren't acceptable in fraternities and a lot of other activities. So if you wanted to call that anti-Semitism, yes.
But not one-on-one so
Oh,
much.
I don't think so. I just never ever allowed it to be a factor. If someone brought it up in my presence and they just didn't like the fact that I was Jewish, I let them know exactly where I stood, and I just cut them out of my circle.
Yeah.
You know, I had no trouble having all the friends and close friends, both Jewish and Gentile, all my life, even to this day, and I just don't let that bother me. You know, if that's a problem with somebody, that's their problem, not mine.
Right. So, did you? We're getting up. Tell me, what were you doing on December 7th, 1941?
Oh boy, December 7th, 1941. We finished our flying for our wings on the Sunday.
Okay, well maybe I should back up
yeah,
again.
right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you had.
Where was I? I was in the Gunner Hotel.
No, let's back up before that then. Well, so you joined the service before?
Yeah,
Okay,
right.
well, let's go back to
okay.
that. This was before or after you graduated from Alabama?
Well, I didn't graduate from Alabama. I got all my credits, and later on they awarded me a graduation certificate, although I didn't finish it on campus at that time.
Did you take ROTC?
We had ROTC, yes. Took ROTC.
Was that Air Force ROTC?
No, that was Confederate. That was infantry. Infantry ROTC, yeah, but that wasn't a big factor. What really happened was one summer when I was home from school, the CPTP program, the Civilian Pilot Training Program, started in, I think it was 38 or 39. But anyway, two of my buddies and I, they were going to start the program at the local fixed base airport that we had. So two of my buddies and I decided that we wanted to learn to fly. And we got involved with that, and as we got more involved, our enthusiasm for flying gradually grew and grew and grew. And go ahead.
When you were growing up, flying wasn't a big thing for you?
No, flying just was practically non-existent in our area. But about the time that we were getting finished with the CPT program, we wanted to go on. But one of the fellows that we knew, somewhat older than we were, got his wings, and he and a buddy of his flew back home, and they were in I think they were flying with the old PT, not the PT, the P-26, P-26, and it was painted yellow and blue, and it was just as charismatic as you could imagine. And they flew over this town, and we talked to them, and we said, we want that, you know. And so when we finished our CPTP program, we applied for flight training. And this was actually in I think the latter part of 1939, December, may have been early 1940. Exact dates I don't remember. And so we applied for cadet training, but they didn't have any place for us at the time. And so they kept nitpicking. We had my buddies and I all had all the requirements, but they kept nitpicking at us on our application. They kept bouncing it back. This, wasn't right. We needed more information. And finally, it was December of 1940, we got our acceptance. We were accepted for training, but then we had to wait for an appointment because there weren't places available. And we got our appointment in February of 1941 to start training in April at a new civilian primary training school, Pine Bluff, Arkansas. And so the three of us headed off. And now you want to know where I was on
Yeah, December 7th.
December 7th. We finished our flying training at Kelly Field, and one of my buddies was over at
San Antonio.
San Antonio. Yeah. We finished our flying training on Thursday, and we had to get ready for inspections and so forth with uniforms and that sort of thing for our graduation on Friday. But Friday night, my buddy at Brooksfield, their class had their graduation party, and so my buddy Joe and I went over to celebrate with our friend over at Brooks. And
that was in San Antonio.
San
also.
Antonio, right. And then on Saturday night, we had our graduation party at Kelly Field. And in those days, a cadet was known to take a wee bit of a nip every now and then. So we were well partied up. And at the Gunter Hotel in San Antonio, with the mezzanine was a cadet club, and we had a big cadet club there. And then the club always rented 4 or 5 rooms for the guys that maybe couldn't make it back to the base. And everybody was partied out, and people were sleeping in the cadet club on top of the ping pong tables, in the chairs, all over the place. And Sunday morning, a sergeant came through about, I forgot what time it was, but it was early in the day. And he said, "You guys got to go. Our order back to the base. You got to get up and go back to the base." And we said, "Oh, Sarge, get the hell out of here. Pearl Harbor has been bombed." And then, so about an hour later, he came through and he said, "You will go back to the base." So that was December 7th.
Now,
Pearl Harbor Day.
Had you seen an event like this coming?
I don't think anybody really saw it coming. Although I think there was always somewhat in the conversation in the bull sessions and that sort of thing. But the consensus was, hell, if the Japanese attacked, we'd take a few B-17s and go over there and bomb them and knock them out. I mean, we weren't astute enough at that time. We weren't knowledgeable enough to really know or think. But I can tell you that we had a very interesting speaker at our graduation exercises. And he became fairly well known after that. It was a fellow by the name of Brigadier General Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Oh, really?
Oh. He was over at Fort Sam Houston, and after his graduation speech, he was only there for maybe a half hour. He excused himself because he had to leave, and he was heading for Washington, flying out for Washington. The rest is kind of history.
Sure. Do you remember much about his speech?
Oh, I think that it was, the usual, typical graduation speech, and you're entering a new adventure of your life, and you've been highly selected, the whole bit.
So then did you stay at Kelly after that?
Well, what happened was, when you got your graduation order, graduation diploma and everything in your commission. Normally you got your first assignment orders with that. We all had orders that were published, but they immediately withdrew that. I was scheduled to go to heavy bombardment down in Mississippi, some of the other guys, so forth. They canceled all of our orders and they held us at Kelly Field, and just a month or so before was when they opened up what we called the Hill, which is now Lackland Air Force Base, which was the first of the pre-flight training schools. And so they assigned us up there temporarily as TAC officers, or whatever you want to call it. And we were there for almost a month.
Now Lackland is that in San Antonio?
San Antonio, yeah, right. It's on the hill right above Kelly Field. Okay. And then we got our orders, and most of us from Kelly Field went to fighter training, and we were sent to Mitchell Field in Long Island, New York, and we got there. The 8th Pursuit Group, which is what we were assigned to, had left. We got there in early January. Yeah, I think it was early January. I think it was after the first year. And the 8th Pursuit Group had pulled out, and they went to the West Coast, and so we were kind of stuck there without anybody, without really an organization. And then they formed the 33rd. Formed the 33rd Pursuit Group, or it was being formed, and we were assigned to the 33rd Pursuit Group, which consisted, well, let's see, actually there was 2 groups. One was, I think, the 57. One, at any rate, they were forming these 2 groups on the East Coast. One was headquartered in Boston. I think that was a 57th, but I'm not sure. The other one was headquartered in Philadelphia, and that was the 60th Pursuit Group. I'm sorry, the 33rd Group and the 60th Squadron.
And that's where you went?
And I went, and our squadron was stationed in Washington, D.C. Of that group, one squadron was in Baltimore, one was in Washington, D.C., and the other was in Norfolk. The headquarters was in Philadelphia. And we went to Washington, D.C. with the 60th.
The 60th.
The 60th.
Okay. 60th.
Fighters. It was Pursuit Group at that. The Pursuit Squadron.
That was it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They didn't change the name to Fighter till somewhat later.
And Washington, D.C. Okay. Was there a name of it? Did it have a field, the name of it?
Yeah, we were at Bowling Field. Yeah.
And how long were you there?
Well, I was there until I left in April of 42.
Okay. And so had you been married by this time or no? No. Did you have a girlfriend or anything like that? Or did you meet
you know.
Well,
yeah.
No ties.
No ties.
Okay.
No commitment. Let me put it there. No strong commitments.
Okay. So then, where were you assigned to then?
Well, then they out of these 2 groups on the East Coast, they put together a task force, and we went aboard the USS Ranger aircraft carrier, and we were the first ones to fly the fighter aircraft off of the carrier.
Did you say? I think I read that some of Doolittle's guys had given you some tips about that or something.
No. We met. I met Jimmy Doolittle in Accra, Africa, where we landed. He was on his way back to States, and we were able to spend an evening with him. And, that was like spending an evening with God. Yeah, interesting thing. We really were, this task force that they put together was 68 aircraft. It was rather interesting because back in September of 1942, our government signed 41, it would be 1941. Our government signed a contract with Pan American Airways to establish a ferrying route across the continent of Africa, from the Gold Coast of Africa up to the Middle East, as a delivery method of getting our P-40s or fighter airplanes to the British on Lend-Lease basis, because we were not at war at that time. The British, we were having difficulty supplying them in that part of the world, and so that was the idea. And they were authorized to go to the military training schools like ours at Kelly Field, Brooks, and so forth, and to recruit pilots to fly these aircraft across that route. Well, they came to Kelly Field, I guess this was in maybe early November, so they were only interested in upperclassmen and so forth. And the idea was that if you signed up with them, you would get your commission a little early, and you could go train with them, etc., etc. Well, we interviewed with them, and they asked them what airplanes they were going to be flying. They were going to be flying the P-40s, and that goes back to another story too. But the P-40s in those days, to most of us, were kind of known as flying coffins. You know, I mean, they weren't a very good airplane. But we're talking about A's and B's models and so forth. So we passed up the opportunity. But several of our classmates did take it up. Well, before they actually got the thing going, war broke out, and so that contract was out of the question. There was no longer the need for Lend-Lease. It was now our people. And then there was the anticipation of what they're going to do later on in getting our aircraft quickly over to Africa and so forth. So we became really an experimental unit. Number one, test the feasibility of flying large numbers, relatively large numbers of fighters off of land-based fighters off of an aircraft carrier. And so essentially to Africa. Secondly, was to establish or test out this route across Africa. Okay. Now,
when we're talking about across Africa, are we talking about north? What part?
We're talking about from Accra on the Gold Coast of Africa.
How do you spell it?
Accra, A-C-C-R-A,
Okay.
and the Gold Coast. I think they call it Nigeria now, if I'm not mistaken. And we went up to Khartoum and on up to Cairo, and then over to what was Palestine at that time. And that was the general route. And at the same time, Doolittle was going across the Pacific, and the intentions were for him to actually, a friend of mine who was a historian with the Air Force uncovered these records. The B-25s going across the Pacific were basically designed as a delivery system to get these B-25s to China. The AVG were down in Burma. They needed augmentation, so the fighters were going to come, the bombers were going to come across that way. So they decided to bomb Tokyo on the way. I'm not sure which came first, the bombing of Tokyo first, but essentially they were going to deliver these aircraft. They were going to go into Burma to become the bomber force supporting the American Volunteer Group, the AVG. A group left the States right after the first of the year, the early part of January, that was headed for Java, the 51st Fighter Group. They were headed for Java. Their airplanes were loaded aboard the original Lexington aircraft carrier. And all the troops and the pilots were aboard a transport.
Were those P-40s?
Yes, these were P-40s. Well, in the battle, they were headed for Java. In the Battle of the Java Straits, so the Langley, did I say Lexington? I think it was Langley. The Langley was sunk,
Oh, right.
and all the aircraft were lost. So this group was diverted to Australia, and then they were diverted to India, and they were intended to go into Burma to augment the American Volunteer Group, to become the fighter force, augment the fighter force later on, take over from them, bomber force coming from Doolittle's people. But they had no airplanes. So when we left the States, we basically had three primary facets to our project. First was the launching of the aircraft off the aircraft carrier. Second was the flight across the continent of Africa to the Middle East, and then on to India, to deliver these airplanes and the pilots to the 51st Group in India, which then was to go into Burma. Unfortunately, while all of this was happening, the American Volunteer Group had to vacate Burma, and they went up into the interior of China. So then when we got to the American Volunteer Group was to disband on July 4th of 1942, and so they were beginning to form the 23rd Fighter Group, but it was being formed in the field. Well, when the American Volunteer Group left, the 23rd Group was activated, but they only had a very small few pilots, most of who were just fellows that stayed on from the American Volunteer Group. So they took one squadron out of the 51st Group that was down in India, in Karachi, and sent that one squadron over to China to immediately have a full squadron. When we got to, and I was in that squadron, in the 16th Squadron. When we got to China, the American Volunteer Group had 14 aircraft that were in flying condition. We brought 24 with us, so we had about 40 airplanes, 40 fighters, and then the 23rd Group was eventually filled in and brought up to strength. And that was the beginning of the China Air Task Force, which took over from the American Volunteer Group.
But you did take off of the carrier.
Yeah.
Is it, which carrier was that again that you?
The Ranger.
The Ranger.
The original Ranger.
Now, where did you launch those things?
We were launched off the coast of Africa, off of the Gold Coast. They launched us a day early because they sighted some unidentified ships.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, so the same thing as happened with Doolittle. And worst weather I've ever flown in my whole life. And but all 68 of us got off and landed okay in the crowd. And if I were to give you an exact date on that, I'm not sure I could, but it was somewhere around the middle of May, 42.
To your knowledge, did that ever happen? I mean, did fighter aircraft ever?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Did that happen a lot?
Yeah, oh, sure. This was in April, May of 42. Then the next group flew off the Ranger 2, and they went into North Africa. Probably not true. They landed at Accra, took the same trip across with us, and they joined up with the British in what was then Palestine, Israel now. And that was at the time when Rommel was knocking at the doors of Cairo. So that was the second one. Then the third group was launched off of the aircraft carrier, I think in either October or November of 42, and that was the North African invasion. And they thought they were going to have to fight their way in, but they didn't have. It worked out. Yeah. So that was the three 93 first month.
So you were, okay, when you flew up, you were delivering these planes, or you were to be delivering yourself as well?
Right,
to
right. Yeah, we were assigned to the point that the organization to whom we were delivering the aircraft. Yeah.
And you don't have to go into a lot of detail, but that transition from the AVG to the China Air Task Force, why did that come about? And did you know much about the AVG? Were they as popular today? I mean, then everybody knew about them like we do now, or what?
Well, I think like all of us, I think like everything that happened in World War II, I think through the years it becomes somewhat glamorized, and rightfully so. I'm not belittling it at all.
But I know there were some Life magazine articles about them, I think.
Yeah,
things like that.
yeah, but I don't think there was too much before they disbanded. A lot of yeah, we knew about them because they were fighters. Whether the bomber people or some of the other guys had the same interest in them that we had, we were interested. But I was interested in them for another reason. As I told you, the Pan Am came to the training schools to recruit for their project. Early or late in November, there was, again, the name slips me and I'll think of it after I walk out of here, came to our school to recruit for the 2nd American Volunteer Group. And under the same kind of a similar basis as they recruited for the 1st American Volunteer Group. And again, we interviewed with them, my buddies and I, and what airplanes you fly on, P-40s, and we didn't want any part of that. But you know, they were offering dollar bills like that. For most of us in those days, that was like millions of dollars today. So we were aware of them and conscious of them, and as the information came back and filtered down to us, why yes, we were very, very interested.
So where did you guys land in China then, or where did you end up?
Well, when we flew into China, we landed in Kunming.
Let me get a map. Maybe we could. This is not a very detailed.
Yeah.
I'm going to put it up here.
Okay.
It's not very detailed, but it does show up pretty good on the thing. So I'll let you kind of take a little bit, and I'll get a little.
Let's see if I can get my bearings here. Okay.
Kunming, did you
Yeah.
say? That's right
That's
there.
right, that's right there. When we were in Karachi was, I think, right over in this area here.
Uh-huh.
And then we flew over and we landed in Kunming. That's right. Yeah.
I'm going to just jump ahead a little bit, but as long as we're on the map, when you flew most of your missions over there, can you kind of show where that you normally went to? Or?
Okay. You know, one of the things that happened was that even when they formed the 23rd group, there was still so few of us, and so they would break us up into small groups. So we'd have maybe 10, 12 airplanes. If we had 12, we were a big force most of the time, maybe 6, 9, something like that, airplanes. So we were all over the place, and that was one of the things that fortunately the Japanese never could figure it out. I mean, they really thought we were much bigger than we were. But the main places that when I was there, the main places were our squadron was based at a place called Yunnan, which was over here on the Salween River, and we spent a good bit of time over there. And a couple of the biggest.
How do you spell that?
Yunnan, Y-U-N. Y-U-N-N-Y-I, I think it's
Okay.
Yunnan-Yi. Yeah. And then we were over on the eastern sector. We were at a place called Kuelin, and I think that's spelled K-W-E-I-L-E-N. And Hengyang, Henggyang. And there was a couple other little bases in between there that we'd fly in and refuel basically and go out. But those were the three in addition to Kunming, of course. Those were three bases. Then we had another base a little later on that was a little north of Kunming called Chanyi, but it was just a fighter base is what it really was, and that was there kind of to back up Kunming where the hump end of the hump flights were. But we just roamed. I mean, we would spend maybe a week or two. Sometimes we don't. I've gone from when I first got there and joined the squadron. Our squadron was up at Chongqing, just outside of here, a place called Baishyi, which again was an air base out there. And but shortly after I got there, one of the flights went over to Hengyang, and one of the flights went to Kuelin, and we had a flight at Baishyi. So we were split up all the time. Then in the December of 42, our squadron. Let's see, how did we wind up there? I guess maybe around September or something. Anyway, we were moved out of there, and our headquarters was at this place called Chanyi. And then we flew out of there on December 24th over to Yunnan-Yi, and one of the big battles. Two of them took place, but over at Yunnan-Yi, one was on Christmas Day, and one was the day after Christmas, as I remember. And then from there, there were four of us. We went into another little air base, and there were just four of us stationed at this air base. And we were right in the mountain areas over there, and I don't remember what the name of it was. And we were there basically to back up Yunnan-Yi in case of a raid. And also, it happened to be where the transfer of from the 10th transfer of command from the 10th Air Force to the 14th Air Force, the actual command transfer took place, and we were there to fly cover for that.
Kind of show me where the Japanese territory was. How close was it to where
Well,
you guys were?
yeah.
It was kind of
Okay. Well, during the time that I was there,
right.
The Japanese did not have much of a base in China. They had, like in Canton, and maybe a circle of 10-15 miles around Canton, which included Hong Kong and so forth. And then they'd come up here to Amoy and a few of these other places along here, and they would just have, I guess, I don't know what the color scheme is here. I guess the blue might be there, but they would control these port areas and just the area around there. And there was and up here along the Yangtze River, they came all the way back in here to Hankow, but never at that time were never up to Chongqing. And so the communists controlled this area up here above the Yangtze River. So and we were at that time. They finally I guess the Chiang Kai-shek regime or our government or something made a deal with the Chinese people in that area up there that were not communists, that if we went down north of the Yangtze River, that they'd help us get out of there. If not, why, they'd have turned us over to the Japanese. But it was a strange thing. Of course, they had this area down here,
Right.
which was French Indochina and Thailand, and then of course they had Burma, but not very far up there. We up to a place called Missional was
Right.
but that was about as far north as they were. But as far as the ground forces were concerned, in China itself, they were not a factor.
You weren't concerned about
No.
being overrun
No,
when you were there.
No. That happened, of course, later on. That film that I just gave you takes that
Yeah.
time frame. One of the great things I think that hasn't been really explained or presented or made really generally public is we had a fellow by the name of Williams. He was with the AVG and he was a communication man. Fabulous guy. In fact, he lived down in San Diego after the war. This guy set up a net that was just unbelievable. If our people would get down any place within that net area, and they could get out of the airplane alive and well, so to speak, they'd come back. These guys would be.
Who was the guy that set that up?
This fellow was, again, I could tell you.
I mean, was he Chinese? Or
Oh, no. He was American Volunteer Group. He was a
Oh.
communications man, was with the American Volunteer Group.
Oh.
And that was one of the things and that net was so good that we very often would know when the Japanese were warming up their planes down at White Cloud Field at Canton. You know, I mean, it was just absolutely fantastic. And we had a guy, Malcolm Rochalt, and Malcolm is still living. He's way up in years. But Malcolm was a photojournalist and was in China as early as in the early 1930s, and spoke fluent Chinese, whatever one of the dialects he spoke. But he would literally rove back and forth through the lines, and made all the contacts behind the lines and everything else. Particularly up in this at this area up in here, this area up in this Shanghai, Hankow, up in this area here, which was when we first got there. If we'd been shot down back there, we were in deep trouble.
Right.
But we paid lots of money to get our guys back.
Yeah.
Which was good.
Oh,
Yeah, that was a fantastic thing.
How many missions did you fly when you were there?
Officially, I have approximately 100 missions, and I'm not sure of the exact number. However, when we first got to China, we had no support people with us. The only thing that we had was a few mechanics and a few armorers. Everything else was furnished to us by the Chinese, our housing, our food, and that sort of thing. But we had no group headquarters at that time. In fact, we didn't have our forms that we filled out in the aircraft. They were long gone. So, and then we were split up so very often for a long period of time, and the groups that they'd be put together, they'd take maybe 4 airplanes from one squadron, 4 from another, and 4 from another. And at that time, our squadron was an orphan squadron in the sense that we were not part of the 23rd group. We were assigned to them on a
Now, was this the 14th Air Force at this point?
no, this was China Air Task Force. This was right.
Tell me again
Okay.
how that transition from
Okay.
AVG to China Task Force.
The transition was the American Volunteer Group had a contract that ran from from July 4th, 1941 to July 4th, 1942. Okay. So we had basically no American presence in China until just shortly before July 4th of 1942, because the American Volunteer Group was there pretty much by themselves. Our squadron was the first fighter squadron that went into China to really form the China Air Task Force. But our group stayed back in India. So we were put on temporary duty, I guess you'd call it, assigned to detach to the 23rd Group. The 23rd Group was just a skeleton organization. They were just being formed in the field. And that became the China Air Task Force. So on July 4th of 1942, American Volunteer Group ceased to exist. Some of their people, like Tex Hill, Ed Rector, Charlie Sawyer, Shields, Frank Shields, Ed Rector, and Tex Hill became the squadron commanders of the 3 squadrons in the 23rd Group. The 23rd Group commander was Bob Scott. Scott is my co-pilot. He was there and on detached service to the American Volunteer Group a little early and flew with them, and he was the group commander. And Chenault, of course, was recommissioned as a brigadier general.
Chenault was he was in charge of the 23rd or China Air Task Force.
China Air Task. He was the commanding officer of the American Volunteer Group.
I know. Right,
okay. Then he became the commanding officer of the China Air Task Force. Mm-hmm. And then in March of 1943, the 14th Air Force was formed, and he became the commanding general of the 14th Air Force. See, up until that time, we were actually belonged to the 10th Air Force, which was stationed in India.
Oh, okay, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
So the 23rd Group was part of the 10th Air Force.
Yeah, right.
Before that.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, right. Well, the command there was a China Air Task Force.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. You've probably heard the story about how when Chenault was given his first star. What's his name?
Bissell.
Bissell, yeah. Bissell was given his star one day ahead of time.
Yeah, so then they were at each other the whole time.
It was ridiculous. It was ridiculous.
And you were witness to some of this kind of
stuff? We were part of it. I mean, we were supposed to, in January of 1940, would be 43, we were supposed to get something like 50 tons or something, quite a large amount of supply. We got a fraction of it. There were times when we were sitting, like up in Hengyang and Kunming, even at Guilin or Yunnan. A lot of times we were sitting there with full tanks of gas in our airplanes, and one refuel full load of gasoline in reserve. That was the one in our tanks was to fight with. The other was to get the hell out with. And we just sat there with that. We never had any. Our food supply was all furnished to us by the Chinese, and
did any of the Chinese fly with you guys?
Yes, we got. There were 16. The first class of the Chinese that were trained here in the States. There were 16 of them, and they came back to us, and probably in the oh, probably in the early part of 1943. And there were 16 of them, so 4 of them were assigned to each of the 4 fighter squadrons that were there, the 323rd groups and ours. So we had 4 of them in our squadron. However, I had virtually no contact with them. The squadron headquarters is back over here, over here in Yunnan, and I had a small group. I think I had 8 aircraft with me up here at Hengyang, and I was up there with this, and there was a flight of P-38s with a little base called Ling Ling, and we were up there. So the Chinese pilots that came to fly with were back here at Yunnan, and I had very little contact with them. Maybe I flew 1 or 2 missions with them. Then later on, of course, you know that they formed a outfit called the CACW, which was a Chinese American composite wing, and that was an integrated where the Chinese pilots were actually in squadrons and so forth. They flew together all the time.
Were the C-47s flying the hump to supply you guys
Yeah.
at this point in time?
Yeah, C-47s, and then the 46s came in, the C-46s.
Right. Tell me about some of your memorable missions.
Oh, well, I guess the most memorable ones are the ones that I wrote about here. We were over at Yunnan. The first big major battle I think that I got into was over at Yunnan, and our squadron got caught on the ground on I think it was December 24th, if I'm not mistaken. Dates are anyway. So fortunately, our airplanes were not destroyed. We didn't lose any airplanes. But General Chennault ordered us to fly an aerial patrol along the Salween River, and I don't know whether I can pick it up here or not. Anyway, it's all up here in this area here. And it was an area where the river takes a sharp bend, and that was a good demarcation. So we were flying aerial patrols, 2 of us at a time. My flight leader at that time was a fellow by the name of Bob Lyles, who later became the squadron commander. And I was flying his wing, and we were out on this patrol, and we were getting low on gas. It was at the end of our patrol. We were headed back to Yunnan, to the base, and all of a sudden I looked over, and there was just a huge mass of Japanese airplane flying maybe 2 or 3 or 4 miles off to my left wing, and looked. I think they were trying to join up and fly in formation with us. So we called in the alert, and the squadron got off the ground. But Bob and I were so low on fuel that we literally had to get out of the area and milk everything that we could. And the Japanese, they came in and they dropped their bombs. They didn't hit our runway, and we finally landed. And when I got on the ground, well, Bob landed, and he taxied up to the ramp, and ran out of gas. I ran out of gas on the rollout. That's how close we call that. We got refueled. They got us back in the air real fast, and we took off just as quick as they got us refueled. So we basically took off separately, and I took off, and I caught a little Japanese plane. I don't know what they called it, but it wasn't a Zero. It was a little fighter plane and actually had fixed landing gears and had cowling on the landing gears. And I think he was kind of more of a recon or something like that, coming around to probably see what damage was done. And I caught that rascal, and that was the first Japanese plane that I shot down.
Was he above you, or when you first saw him, or how
Well,
did you?
not really. Of course, I was taking off, and he was up at. I guess he was probably at maybe 18,000 feet altitude. And the first time I saw him, I was below him, quite a bit below him, but I was behind him, and so I think I was able to hide out from him a little bit.
Yeah.
But I was able to get up high enough that I was able to get some speed up. But I didn't really need it because that plane was he was slower than we were.
And so did you come straight from behind, or was it a deflection shot?
Yeah, I think I think I came up kind of up underneath it. He was kind of. I probably should do it the other way. He was going along, and I think I kind of came up from below where I don't think he ever saw me.
Did he catch on fire or explode?
No, I don't think so. The last I saw him was he was just spinning earthbound, and part of his wing came off, and so he had no chance of recovering.
One of the, from what I understand, misconceptions is that I guess I used to always think that the Zero was faster than the P-40, but I understand that in a flat out. The P-40 might be even a little bit faster. It's just that it wasn't as maneuverable, and you couldn't. The Zero could make tight circles and things like that.
You know, truthfully, I can't honestly answer that from experience. All I know is that we were taught, and when I was had the decision to make, I always was sure we had speed up going in,
Dive or
hit
something
them
like
and
that.
get the heck out
Right.
and come back for the second time.
Yeah.
And because we couldn't turn with them,
Right.
we couldn't climb with them, and I wasn't about to test them.
Right.
You know.
So then what happened after in that particular?
Well, then the guys that did get off beat that formation up pretty good. I've forgotten how many of those planes were shot down on that mission. But then, for a long while after that, at no time that I was at UNE did they ever come back and raid our base. So that we kind of stopped them, if you want to call that.
Right.
Well, I guess that's not true. I guess there was another time, maybe in January, but I don't think I really got into that scrap. That was when, maybe that was a little later, maybe early February. That was when there were four of us. I wasn't the lead, the flight leader at that time, but there were the four of us that were over at this little outpost base. We just didn't have any fuel. We couldn't do anything. We sat there purely defensive. We had enough fuel to, for maybe a couple defensive flights, and that was it.
You've were mentioned. We talked about that. I think perhaps 4 times in various publications. Can you talk a little bit about those for me or for us?
Well, okay. This first one was, Teddy White, who was a Life magazine correspondent. He was. This issue came out in April of 1943. I forgot what mission it was on, what flight it was on. Now, I could go back and look up. Anyway, we were in a fight, and if you looked at the configuration of a P-40, you would see, okay, I don't know whether you can see this here or not. Okay, there we go. Yeah. Okay. All right, now, right back here, right in this area here, it's a little concave area and with a window. And in order to see back of you and down, what you'd have to do is you'd have to really pull back and look over your shoulder so that you could just peer into that very, very small area. Well, we were in a fight, and if I'm not mistaken, it was down in the Hanoi area or someplace there. I forgot. But I pulled back to look back this way, and just as I did that, normally, okay, just to go further, in order to see down in front of you, you'd almost have to, if you see most guys' pictures, you'll see guys in the P-40, like the picture I have, they're sitting there and they're leaning a little forward so that they can see down in this area right here. Mm-hmm. Well, I just pulled back and I was looking like this, and that shell went right through the canopy, and when I got back down on the ground, my crew chief said to me, he said, you know, lean forward like you do, you know, when you're flying. And so he took a screwdriver and he just pushed it through the hole, and it was about this point. Oh. Yeah. And that was the story that Teddy White wrote up in the Life magazine, and the picture that was in there. Yeah, this one here that was written up in Sharks Over China by Carl Molesworth. That's the one that I told you about when Bob Lyles and I were
almost ran out of gas.
Yeah, ran out of gas. And then the one that's in that book of Ding Hao, America's Air War in China.
We have that book. By the way, maybe you gave it to us. I don't know, but we've got it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the one where that's the one where the other Bob, this fellow Casey and I got off, and the others just weren't able to get into the air, and then he had to come back. He had to abort because his engine was cutting out on him, and that was a problem we had. It was a very common problem, and I was left alone in the air. And so I made my attack on them. And
what were you attacking then?
Well, there were yeah.
Give me the circumstance of that.
Okay, there was two waves. If I remember correctly, there were two waves of Japanese bombers escorted with their Zero fighters, and they were separated by maybe 5 or 10 minute intervals. Okay, and we picked them up on our net, this net that I spoke to you about, and they were about 50 miles out. What we normally do, we'd wait until they were within about a 50-mile range, again, just to conserve on gasoline. And this Lieutenant Casey and I, he was flying my wing, and we got airborne. And just shortly after we got airborne, he had to abort because his engine was cutting out. He just wasn't going to go anyplace. And I picked up this flight, but we knew that the Japanese would, you know, it's not hard to tune in on somebody else's radio wave. I mean, that's why you don't talk. But we knew that they listened to us most of the time. So I had nothing else to do. I think it was kind of taking the edge off of my own nervousness. And so I started calling the instructions to the other guys. Eventually they did get off. I was hoping that they were getting off, but I wasn't sure. So I was telling them, do this and do that, and where they were at and so forth. And I made my attack and ran on them, and not being a very good shot with my guns, I did get one of the bombers, but I ran out of ammunition which is easy to do. You freeze on that damn trigger. You know better, but you just do. And so I had to get out of there. It wasn't any point of mine. I wasn't going to scare them out of the sky. And but before the other four got off back in the air, they turned and went back. I don't know whether it's just on a training mission. I don't think I scared them, but fortunately they did. So it was interesting. And they wrote that one up.
That was a twin-engine Betty, what they call it, Betty?
Betty bomber, yeah.
And do you recall how you were in relation to that one, or was it just too much?
I have to tell you, Dave, I later went through the gunnery training school and became a gunnery training officer, and I trained all my guys on all this deflection shooting. And at the end of the class, I used to tell them exactly the way I thought it had to be done, and that is, forget all that bullshit and fly up their ass. And I think that's probably the way. You're never quite sure, because you come in you come in on a dive and turn, and then you pull up.
Would they fly like in V's?
Yeah.
And do you remember where in the V that particular one was? Cheek shut?
I think. Oh boy. I think it was kind of the second element, probably the second element. As best I recall, they were kind of an echelon form, one flight of three, another flight of three on this side, and then basically the same thing over there, and then generally they'd have another flight either a little bit lower or a little above it behind. And as best I remember, it was in the second element on the right hand side. But
Okay, and then the fourth amendment.
Oh yeah, that took place over at Heng Yang, and I had this small group. I don't remember what I say it was. I think we had 4 aircraft or something like that. Anyway, we were up above, and I don't know why we didn't pick them up, but we didn't. But all of a sudden, I saw them, and they were just almost below me.
Bombers?
Yeah, well, they had fighters too. Yeah, they always come over escorting fighters. And when I saw them down there, I just took that airplane and kind of laid it over, and I just sucked that thing in so tight, I just literally spun out. And my buddy was flying my wing. He was following me, and he spun out too. We say we were in formation, not quite, but but both of us literally spun down through the Japanese.
By spinning down, how do you mean? You mean
we were. Are you a pilot?
No.
Okay. Well, when you spin, you lose control. You've lost the control of the ailerons and the tail.
By spinning, you're talking about like a corkscrew?
Yeah, right.
Oh,
yeah. No, it's not a real tight thing.
Yeah.
It's going down like this. And we were in the process of recovering when we went through, but literally went through. And we both pulled out, and we were near enough so that we both kind of pulled out in formation together. And we came, that one I know how I got, because I came right straight up. I had a lot of speed by the time I pulled out. I had a lot of speed. I was able to pull that right up, almost vertically, and just shot them up through the belly. Again, most of the time when you hit those planes, it seemed like obviously there's more wing space than there is other spaces, so you are more likely to hit wings, and almost always part of if not all the wing, part of the wing would break off. They just did.
And how many did you get in that?
Well, we got one. Yeah, just one. I was never. But we did. I did shoot at a lot of them, but I didn't see any of them go down. You never know. Our guys in our squadron, and I'm sure it happened to others too. I'm not. but our guys were pretty careful. I think most of us were. If we saw one go down, okay, we claimed it. If we shot it up and we didn't see it go down, but we don't know. On the way home, it may never have made it there.
So how many confirmed did you get there?
All told, I had three confirmed. I had three
Did you
confirmed.
have any what you would call probables?
I would guess if that, fairly sure that I hit them, probably about 6, and I shot at an awful lot of others, and I don't know what happened.
Tell me about some of the. Okay, is there any more of that we need to talk about?
That was the fourth one that was
Right.
in the Shark's Orchard.
Tell me about some of the interesting people that you met over there.
Oh boy.
Cochran, did you?
Well, no, Phil Cochran was not. It was. I knew Phil in the States before I
You
went
did?
over. Yeah.
Oh,
But
how did you
he
know
was
him?
he was one of the squadron commanders of that other group that I told you was stationed up in the Boston area.
Oh,
Yeah, okay. I knew him, and what was the other guy's name? Dave, you're testing my memory. Anyway, yeah, the people that I had contact with and really got to know. Of course, General Chennault. And there were so few of us there to begin with that he got to know us all almost by personal name and even nicknames. I was in the service. They shortened my name from Liepe. They called me Lip. That was what I was called. And he would always refer to me as that. And when we first got over there, I told you we were stationed up at Baishii, right out of Chungking, and that was General Chennault's headquarters. And we were very, very, very fortunate because every afternoon, around 3 o'clock or so, 2, 3 o'clock, and it was just a small group of us again, there was maybe 6 or 8 of us, he would call us over to his office, and he would sit there with a chalkboard, and he would go over tactics with us. And I have to tell you that he had instilled in us all this information that the first time I was in combat, really, I just did it. I just felt like I'd been there before. I mean, it had just been ingrained in us. So he was one of the most remarkable men from that standpoint that I'd ever known. Okay.
Did he? Was there a charisma about him, or was it just that he was just so thorough in everything they did?
He was a very, very easy guy to get to know. He was a very common, ordinary sort of guy. He was really one of the boys. He loved to play baseball. He loved to play poker. He loved to, he didn't have hours to spend with the general, but he would sit with you for a few minutes and shoot the bull. And he was a very, very easy guy. He would back you to the limit. Back you to the limit. All he expected of you was to do your best. Okay? That's all he asked of you. Do your best. And, he used to instill in us, he said our purpose there was to destroy the enemy. But he always told us, he said, you and your airplane are more valuable to me than one more Japanese. And he just was that kind of guy. He could be tough as nails, boy, I'll tell you. Don't cross him.
Did you ever see anybody crossing?
I don't know that I saw, but I happened to walk into headquarters one time when he was telling this, I guess it was a second lieutenant, and he had a few words to describe the ancestry. I mean, he really was he was pretty even tempered. I remember you talk about memorable experiences. We came back one time from an escort mission. We were down in Canton, escorted some B-25s down. We got in a fight down over Canton, and we came back, and boy, we were just full of piss and vinegar, really. So we came over the field, and we came down, and we showboated. We hit the deck, pulled on up. A couple of guys did some slow rolls away, and we came up and peeled off. Just like you'd see in the moving picture. Well, the general's headquarters was in the Quaylen area. The terrain is such that there's like huge mounds of rocks. We call them inverted ice cream cones. And the general's headquarters, command post, was up on the side of one of these in a cave up there. That was maybe 150 feet above the ground. And there was a dirt road that came down to the field. Well, we're getting out of the plane, and we see this cloud of dust of a Jeep coming down, and we're figuring, man, the old man's coming down, and we're going to tell him, wow, what great soldiers we were. Man, we had this thing whipped, and I forgot who it was, but it wasn't the general, and whoever was in the Jeep said the general wants to see you up in the briefing room. So again, we were figuring we're going up there, and we're going to get all this praise, pat on the back, and we got up there, and General Snout got up, and he just praised us. Boy, he said never had a finer bunch of guys, and just the greatest group that he'd ever had. And he walked over and he raised up the curtain on the map that was there, and he said, since you guys like to fly close to the ground, you like it so much, he said, I've got a perfect place for you. And he turned us around and he sent us out on a strafing mission. We weren't on the ground more than it took time for him to tell us what we were going to do, where we were going to do it, for him to fill our gas tanks up. And off we went.
Got his point across.
He got his point across, because the thing we hated was strafing. We hated it. But that's the kind of guy he was. Yeah, he
didn't rant and rave or anything.
No.
Just
he had a way of letting you know what was it. Yeah, he was great. Okay, and history tells you what kind of guy he was. And then probably the next.
Before we go there, tell me, what were strafing missions like?
Oh, we would strafe up along the Yangtze River. We'd strafe shipping up there, and that was primary. We'd go down to Hong Kong Harbor, and we'd strafe shipping down in the harbor.
How big a type of ships?
Oh,
would you be
well,
going after?
We've gone after naval vessels for anything. I don't know how to describe them, but I guess probably some of those tankers or freighters, whatever they were probably 20, 30,000 ton or whatever. I mean, whatever was there, and not too much. Occasionally we'd go up in this area above the Yangtze River there, where the Japanese the line between there and Shanghai. We would go after troop transports and so on. But then when we were over in the west, down along the Burma Road.
Yeah.
Where the heck's the Burma Road? Yeah. Well, okay. Down in this area here.
Right.
We'd go down strafing primarily vehicular traffic. Once in a while we'd catch some troops or something like that, but it was basically we'd go after trucks and vehicles.
Did you have tracers?
Oh yeah, and of course the other thing, one of the biggest projects was to strafe their airfields. Like up in Hankow, we'd go down in Hong Kong, in Canton, White Cloud down there. Over here, not so much. over when we go down to Hanoi and Haiphong, down into French Indochina, we'd go after power plants sometimes. What we do there is kind of do two things. We'd try to dive bomb a 500 pound or something like that.
But I say you did use tracers.
Oh yes, yeah, oh sure.
And you paid attention. I mean, they were helpful. I mean, was it?
Oh, you know, I think that the tracers satisfied an ego trip more than they were effective, really, because sometimes I think that the tracers would really misguide you. You would think that these cans, and we called it our camel soup plan. But it worked.
Yeah, whatever works. You were starting to say, I think, about some more memorable people.
Yeah, okay. Bruce Holloway, of course, was the group commander of the 23rd group, and he later became, deputy. He became Strategic Air Command 4-star. In fact, I spent some time with him just a year or so ago, and. Bob Scott got as my co-pilot. I got to know him fairly well.
Right.
Yeah.
First time I came, because I had read his book years ago, and first time I came, when I first moved here to Palm Springs in 1970, I joined the Navy League.
Okay.
And the first meeting I went to, he was a guest speaker.
Oh, was he?
It was really quite a thrill.
Yeah, he was a good speaker. Yeah, really good speaker. And then
had they already written that book and done the movie on him when you knew Bob Scott?
Well, I've known him, ever since. I see him every now and then.
No, I know that, but I mean when you first got to know him over in the China Air Task Force.
Well, no, he wrote that after he came back. Yeah, after that. Right. And Johnny Allison.
Who's
okay, Johnny Allison was one of the really. He and Phil Cochran were very, very big buddies. In fact, they grew up in the same town together. But and when Johnny Allison was the deputy commander, along with Phil Cochran of the 1st Air Commando organization, and Johnny later became. I guess it was the FAA at the time, but anyway, he was a deputy chief of the either FAA or the CAA, whichever they call it, and he was the former president of the Air Force Association.
Oh.
Yeah, and he's a board member emeritus of that. And he's one of the prime movers between this Air Force monument project.
Oh.
Yeah. And Johnny was when we were first when I was in my first squadron, the 60th Pursuit Squadron. There were some names that you heard around of outstanding fighter guys in the Air Force. There were guys like Jake Cannon. There was Phil Cochran, Johnny Allison was one of that group. What's this other guy's name? Anyway, there was maybe a half a dozen that were, everybody knew, because, prior to World War II, particularly the fighter command was a very, very small, very, very close group.
Yeah.
And so these guys were in that group. But another guy that I got to know real well was Spike Momeyer. Became General Momeyer. Later became the head of the fighter forces in Vietnam.
Oh.
But he was my first group operations officer. And Spike Momeyer was known to be able to put one civil word in between about 10 expletives. quite a guy. This is off the record, but quite an interesting thing. Spike Momeyer wanted to go through flight training. That time you couldn't be married. He divorced his wife, went through flight training. She followed him. The day when he graduated, they got remarried. And Spike Momeyer was part of the American military mission that was over in Cairo prior to our entry in World War II. And I'm absolutely sure, knowing Spike Momeyer, that he flew missions, but obviously for obvious reasons were not there.
Right.
And then he came back to the States, and he was our group commander. And then Pete Casado, who commanded the 9th Air Force, was our group commander. And I got to know him fairly well because I spent 2 weeks up at the Philadelphia Information Center and worked with him fairly good. So I got to know many of the high guys that went on became, but not because of me. It was just circumstances. There were so few at the beginning that if you were there, you got to know them.
So how long was the China Air Task Force in existence?
It came into existence officially on July 4th of 1942, and on the 10th of March of 1943, the 14th Air Force was activated, and the China Air Task Force became the 14th Air Force.
And was that the plan all along?
Oh, I don't think so. I don't think they ever planned on having. The 14th Air Force was the first and only Air Force that was formed in the field. Other than that, they were all formed, back here in the training transition. Yes, yeah, sure, yeah, right. Yeah, he commanded the 14th until just I guess it was the summer of 45 when he was relieved of his command, and anyway, which was another political deal.
Now, so what 14th Air Force, what air group and what squadron did you become then?
Okay, we were, while I was there, we were still the 16th Fighter Squadron attached to the 23rd Fighter Group. And here's another interesting thing. According to the rules and regulations, at that time, the smallest unit that could be detached from one unit to another in the Air Force, Air Corps, was a group. You could not detach a squadron. So, when the 16th was detached to the 23rd Group, we literally were taken out of the command of the 51st Group, which was basically our parent organization. So, our parent organization, while this period existed, we were directly under the 14th Air Force. Now, back in the olden days, an Air Force could have a headquarters squadron, so to speak. We weren't officially a headquarters squadron, but that was the kind of the way that they did it. And of course, when the 14th Air Force was formed, Chenault wasn't about to send us back. I mean, he just kept us. I mean, that's all it was to it. He just kept us. Now, in the fall of '43, about the time that I came home, which was in September, October, November period, the 51st Group was transferred from the 10th Air Force to China, and then the 16th Fighter Squadron went back to the 51st Group. So if you look up the history of the 16th Fighter Squadron, you'll find it listed under the 51st Group.
But you consider it, so if I were to ask you one, or if you had to pin it down to what would you?
Well, my affiliation, I never was affiliated with the 51st. Yeah, just very briefly, the 23rd Group, and the 23rd Group includes us in all when they have their reunions and activity, that we are always included as part of the 23rd group. Yeah.
So, when did you leave then?
I left, let's see, when did I leave? I left in October of 1943. And I landed back in the States in early November, so it was late October 43.
So you were over there for more than a year then?
Oh yeah, yeah. I got into China in June, late June.
Right. Did you have any leave time when you were over there? Were you able to go anywhere?
No, we didn't have any leave time. What we were fortunate to be able to do, they set up a training base, a transition training base for fighters down in Karachi, India, and this was still while anyway. So we would take some old airplanes, so-called war-weary planes, and we took them down to Karachi and left them there for training airplanes. We'd pick up new P-40s and take them back to China with us. And so we would have that period. And when my buddy and I went down there, unfortunately, can you believe this, we got weathered in down in India around around the very interesting places.
Did you, while you were over there, did you get any other fighters besides P-40s?
The only other fighters came in. We had a squadron of P-38s.
No P-51s?
No, they came after I left.
So when you came back, how did you come back? On a flyback?
Yeah, flew back on, I guess what would be the MATS type airplane.
And where did you come into the States?
Well, I came in the States in Florida, Miami, Florida, and then went on leave, and then when I was assigned to the 2nd Air Force, which was headquartered in Colorado Springs. And when I got there, one of my former classmates was the operations officer at Colorado Springs. So he said, "Where do you want to go?" And two of my very, very closest friends who had come home before me were stationed with a fighter squadron down in Baton. We were in Hammond, Louisiana, which was in a transition training, P-47. So I said, "Hey, let me go join my buddies." So I went down there, and then I was only there for a short while, and I went to the instructor gunnery training program down at Matagorda Island. And while I was there,
where is that?
That's off the coast of. And I was operations officer.
Galveston.
Galveston Army Air Force Base. We had a gunnery training school, a transition for P-47s, and we had some P-40s there. But the gunnery training, we used the P-40, but most of those guys went to P-51s. But this was in, let's see, when did I get down there? 44. I got down there, I guess it was around September or October of 44. And then while I was down there in January, they sent me to the Command and General Staff College, which was at Fort Leavenworth at that time, was the Army, but we had the Air Staff course at the Command and General Staff College.
That's in Kansas?
Yeah, Leavenworth. Fort Leavenworth is actually. Right. And then when I went back to my unit, let's see, I was there from February, March. When I got back to my unit, uh,
Which was?
at Galveston Air Force Base. Uh, there was some big changes taking place down there at that time, and while I was gone, of course, they moved somebody else into my spot. So when I got back there, they became the base operations officer just as an interim assignment, and then I was given a P-63 squadron out at Pyote Air Force Base.
How do you spell that?
P-Y-O-T-E, Pyote. That was out in the
Is that in Texas too?
yeah, Texas, out in the desert of Texas. And
Those are Black Widows, P-60.
no. The P-61 is the Black Widow.
Okay.
P-63 is like what we have. It's the
Oh.
King Cobra.
Oh, right, the King Cobra. That's right.
Yeah, we have one
Okay.
on here.
Yeah, that's right.
And I had that unit until World War II entered in September, and then they broke us up, and I was sent up to Chicago to with the recruiting. They were starting recruiting from scratch, and I wound up at Chicago. They recruiting with the Fifth Army was broken down into what they call recruiting districts. The state of Illinois became one district, and I was sent from there down to East St. Louis, and I was the operations officer for the second in command at the recruiting unit in Southern Illinois. And then I was transferred back up to the headquarters of the Illinois recruiting district, and then from there as operations officer, and then from there I went over to Fifth Army headquarters and became took over operations of the recruiting service there.
Where was that?
That was Chicago. Yeah. And that's where I came off of active duty in 1948, March of 48. And I was down in St. Louis, and for a while, basically I was in the reserve unit in St. Louis, and was a squadron commander of a disaster control squadron in St. Louis until Mr. McNamara chopped the legs out from underneath us.
How so?
Well, the unit we had, the disaster control unit came about. You know, when the Cuban Missile Crisis took place, they dispersed the SAC aircraft all over, got them off their bases, and at the St. Louis Lambert Airfield, they had two B-47s that were dispersed out there, and these two airplanes were just sitting out there, no support, no nothing. I mean, the guys, they were there, and so they decided that after that experience, so what they needed to do was form what they called a disaster control unit, and this organization was groups and regions, and then groups and squadrons. Okay, and so the purpose of the disaster control unit was to have a retrieval unit and a support unit for in case of a disbursement like took place there, or if the aircraft came back in case of these were the days when we were worried about intercontinental ballistics and everything else. If an aircraft couldn't make it back to a base, it could land there. We could give it minimum support. We could give crews. We could give crews a housekeeping care. We could give them quarters and this sort of thing. We could refuel their aircraft. Minimal maintenance and so forth. It was a very uniquely structured. I had a Episcopal priest as the engineers had every interstate highway for about 50 miles around that had straight stretches that if we needed to land aircraft on the B-52s we knew would tear up but at least we could get them down. What else do we have? I mean, it was we had a field hospital